Hello, welcome to Comic-Con at Home. Thank you so much for joining us. With me today are the authors from two brand new and very excellent graphic novels and first second books. From the Adventure Zone Crystal Kingdom, we have Travis and Griffin McElroy, who are the co-creators and writers. And then we also have the co-adapter and artist, Carey Pietsch. And from Team Bubble, we have creator Jordan Morris, and who also co-wrote the book, and co-writer Sarah Morgan. And we also have co-adapter and artist Tony Cliff. Thank you all for joining us.
And Howie, will you also mention your role?
I will also
in the
introduce
process?
myself. I'm Alison Wilgus. I edited all these books. So these were all my dear friends who made wonderful books together with me. So nice to see all of your faces. Usually we just email a lot. So for anybody who's not familiar with your books, I am going to make you elevator pitch them so they can know how wonderful they are and go immediately buy them. So Griffin, would you like to start by talking about the Adventures in Crystal Kingdom?
Is this the pitch where I discuss the mini elevators in the Adventure Zone Crystal Kingdom? Because there are some actually plot critical elevators in the Adventure Zone Crystal Kingdom. It is the fourth book in the Adventure Zone graphic novel series, which is an adaptation of the first campaign of a D&D game that we played for The Adventure Zone, which is a podcast that I do with my family. Travis is one of those family members. And then also there's one more brother named Justin and our dad, Clint, who sort of took the lead on the writing stage of the graphic novels so far. And the rest of us were cleanup batters. That's a sports reference, I feel like. It is a sort of sci-fi fantasy fusion story that is a continuation of the arc. It's where things start to get a little bit hot and heavy, so to speak, narrative wise, not like erotically speaking. That's never really,
a little bit.
No, it maintains its normal level of eroticism throughout,
right, which is quite low. But yeah, it's if you're looking for a big hearty read, now there will be 4 of these books that you can read. What are you doing this weekend? Go read 4 books, 5 books, including Bubble.
Jordan, speaking of which, would you like to talk about Bubble?
I would. So Bubble is a sci-fi comedy with no elevators, not a single elevator in the whole freaking thing. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of based in it's kind of a near future world where everybody kind of lives in these bubble cities. Outside the bubble cities are all sorts of monsters and beasts and horrors. But inside the bubbles, you can live however you want to. There's a bubble for hipsters, a bubble for suburban people. There's a Florida 2 bubble that only gets mentioned that hopefully we'll go to in a future installment. Yeah, and it's I would say it's deliciously satirical. A real send-up of the foibles of our modern age. Yeah, all our characters are kind of, in their early and mid 20s, and they have to like participate in this kind of like Hunger Games version of the gig economy in order to survive. And yeah, but they're all friends. It's kind of 4 friends who kind of lean on each other, and they all, are kind of tied to this horrible corporate structure and have to kind of find some way to break out. So they kind of go on this adventure with many sex jokes, lots of gore, lots of fights, and all that good stuff. Monsters, robots, aliens, delicious satire. What more could you want? And not a single elevator to ruin the thing.
Aw.
But there is a lift, weirdly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're talking.
Now we got the international humor. That's a very important part of this panel.
Yeah.
So just to start off, kind of to talk to the writer specifically, and again, I will call on someone if you don't volunteer to go first. So we were working on your books pretty far into it this time last year. Like, comics take a really long time. My understanding is this is super different from making podcasts. And so my question is, like, for the Taz folks, like, has that gotten any less weird over the years? And for the Bubble folks, like, how is this different from how Bubble got made?
I would say that from the it's changed. It has the adaptation process has adapted, because starting with Here There Be Gerblins, it was a lot easier to adapt into a graphic novel length, like, thing, because there was so much less content in the episodes, right? It was a lot less dense. And now, as we're getting deeper and deeper into the story, a lot more of the adaptation process is like, which part of this is actually like necessary and which part was us just like goofing around, and what parts can we move, and if we lose this, how does that affect the end game? Because also, when we started adapting the first book, podcast wasn't done yet. We hadn't finished the balanced series, and so now we have a much better idea of like, well, we can't cut this because it has this payoff in like 60 episodes or whatever, whereas this we don't really ever mention again, so it's not as necessary to it. And I mean, there's also, I think, because just the difference between the audio medium versus the visual medium, there's stuff that like on the page in words makes complete sense, and then we get to like the thumbnail stage and we're like, this doesn't make any sense. Why did we write that? This is dumb.
And also, like, I mean, for all of you, I mean, there's a very big gap between when you're first working on this and when the book is coming out. Like, it's a very long process. So I'd love to hear about like how it's been to move from a more immediate medium of podcasting to something where you work on something for years instead of for weeks or months at a time.
It's definitely luxurious. Yeah.
Yeah.
The luxury of rewrites and looking at something and sitting with it and living with it and seeing the same joke many, many times over and going, do I still love this? Then it stays. Yeah. That's been a hoot.
I will say, in combination with the entire like last 16 months and the fact that we are routinely working on at least 2 books, if not 3, when we sat down for this panel, I could not remember which one we were talking about. There's so much. I was like, which one is this? Have we put out? Is that one out yet? Which week? What? Hold on. Where are we at?
Because Travis, you mentioned, looking at, there were parts where you're goofing around, and it wasn't clear whether you kept those parts in or cut them out.
So there were parts, and I think that this is just the nature of the show. And I think we've had to deal with this in different forms with each kind of section of the balance campaign of like, is this character based or story based, or is this Justin, Travis, Griffin, and Clint making jokes with each other and it has nothing to do? I think that there are moments where it's like, there was a meta removal level of like, yes, this was very funny because people knew it was us joking around and not actually us trying to develop anything or tell. Like, we left plenty of jokes. It's still primarily us goofing around. Don't get me wrong.
But we've learned how to excise that stuff with pretty brutal efficiency at this point, which is good because there's a lot of other different, far more challenging work to do in adapting this like bonkers, dense and complex sort of storyline that we told over the course of 69 episodes of a podcast. Yeah.
And I think we've also said it all along the way that removing a lot of the jokes, and not all the jokes, right? Just the section of jokes that's like, this worked because it was the 4 of us, not because it was the characters or the story or anything, leaves room for more of the visual jokes that Carey has brought to the like art side of it and has made it feel more unique as a graphic novel and not just us trying to like copy and paste directly over, the podcast.
I'm going to put a pin in that because I have another question about that we're going to come back to. But first, I do want to hear from Carey and Tony. Specifically, you're both adapting what were originally audio only stories. They do have some description in them, but not a lot in some cases. So you're kind of starting from scratch in a lot of ways. And so basically you're sort of taking on all the roles of like a whole production studio. Like, you're doing costume design, set decoration, lighting, you're choreographing the action scenes, you're doing all the character acting, like all the visual acting. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about kind of how you worked with the rest of the team and yourselves to kind of like, how did you build the world of your books and kind of the visual language of your books, especially because your books are both very different from each other. So I'd love to hear more about that. I'm going to make Carey start because you've been very quiet as we've been yammering about nonsense.
Fair. I feel like I agree that the audio description of place is a great starting point. And I think the other really helpful thing is the sense of tone and place that you get through not just telling people like there is a table in this room, but how are the characters by way of the people playing them sounding in this scene? What is the music doing to help set that tone? And then kind of translating that into a visual. So it's like someone has given you a description of a place and then also an audio mood board. And then your job is to kind of translate that into visual. So I feel really lucky. And not only has the actual visual development process also always been collaborative, but it's never felt like I've been starting from scratch. So I don't know. I'm curious, Tony, about like, what do you feel like the balance of translation versus like inventing? Like, I don't remember if the little lizards that are on the first big establishing shot of the bubble graphic novel are in the podcast, or if that was just like, you know what we really need? This particular cool beast lizard to sell this world.
I mean, you always do need to add more beast lizards to that.
I agree.
But I think I was sort of thinking along the same lines as you, is that there's not, I think when you get that combination of the voice acting and the story and it all comes together, it sort of suggests something that, and I don't know, it felt like a lot of it came together really naturally, like the sense of humor, all of those clues, you sort of like, you know, like listen to them and pay attention to them, and they come together, I think, in a really natural way. And there were some things like some of the character designs. I think when we were talking about Morgan, everybody, I think it was pretty, I sent across a design and was like, yeah, great, that looks like Morgan. And then there are characters like Annie, where we did a whole bunch of back and forth, and she was really, really hard to identify.
She had a very specific chaotic bisexual energy, and we really needed to like nail it exactly.
Again, it's back to that luxury of choice when you're enjoying the conversation and making sure that you're including your audience and being diverse and saying, making sure your lead female characters aren't all identical comic book booby women. Not that I have anything against comic book booby women. Hide the Elvira picture. Yeah. But that was, to me, I mean, we probably had like traumatic back and forth, but all I remember, like Talbot, is the great stuff that where we just, it felt like we had so much choice with having such a great artist to sort of say, how about this? How about this? How about this? It was great.
Yeah, and then later on, when I came in, I'm like, you guys, this is nothing compared to like a professional animation production where they'd have like 100 designs for anything.
That sounds like so much work.
Yeah, no thanks.
I forget sometimes that you came up in the animation minds, and then I read your books and I'm immediately like, oh, right, yes. Tony has always had to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, let's just do 95 designs and see which one we like best. We'll put a hat from this guy on the cape of that guy.
So to kind of loop
There's
back,
there's not a single cape in the book. What a wasted opportunity.
Yeah.
No elevators, no capes.
That's not true. That's not true.
Who has a cape?
Eli's got a cape.
you're right, he does.
Yep. Okay. I stand
Woo!
corrected.
That's very
I have
him.
not read it.
Heard good
But you,
things,
I mean,
heard
you were
good
right
things.
about the elevators.
Yeah, I've been meaning to read it. Yeah, just
We'll
gotta
get around to it.
I just gotta
When it
finish
comes-
The Artist's Way, and then
Yeah.
So
There's a handful of things artists are not supposed to drop: chain link fences, bicycles, and elevators. They're all notoriously difficult.
right.
You want to make an artist angry? That's where you send them.
sorry
Those
that you
not
guys
the
are
three
finding out
things
this
I would
morning.
have picked. That's so interesting.
Yeah, Shannon Fence is just this.
Yeah.
Come on, I can do that.
For those of you at home, my effort to ask the next question is very accurate to the editorial experience. This is basically it. So
Heroic work.
Yeah.
So to kind of loop back to something we were talking about earlier, and I know, Jordan, I specifically want to hear what you have to say about this because we've talked about this before. So you're, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of where I am on my document. This is hilarious. Okay, so you've all been doing comedy and audio for a long time. Like all the folks on the screen who are podcast people, this is your thing. So how was it getting used to doing comedy and collaborating with artists in a visual medium and kind of leaning into the strengths of that medium specifically? Like, I'd love to hear more about kind of how the adjustment period of writing for comics as opposed to writing for audio for comedy specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was not, it actually wasn't the huge shift that maybe I was worried about. It was pretty natural. I mean, I think Bubble is a very comic booky story. So I think that like, the growing pains as far as like genre were very minimal, because it's like, yeah, this is a lot of fighting and robots and monsters. That's a comic book. So I think that kind of was a natural fit in a lot of ways. And like Tony is a very funny man. He's a funny guy. He's got a great sense of humor.
A real silly boy is what we call it in the industry.
He's a real silly Billy.
Yeah.
And I think that like he, there's like something I love about the book is that there's comedy pauses in it. Like something funny happens and then you get to see the characters react to it, which is not something that happens in all graphic novels. Like a lot of times, sometimes a great joke will be stepped on because, you don't get to see the people react to the funny thing. And I think that's just something that Tony is naturally great at, and, maybe has honed in those animation lines that we mentioned earlier. So that was just a great thing that could have been an issue that was not an issue. And and as far as like other adjustments to make, like, so Tony and I were talking a while back about Mad Magazine and what a like weird influence Mad Magazine was on all of us, that maybe we didn't clock as an influence, but you're like, oh, I read a ton of that at a formative age and it really informed a lot of stuff. And when you think about those old Mad comics, like, yep, there it is. It's like,
oh no, we lost Tony. Tony, come back. Come back to us, Tony.
It's like, for the like Full House parody that's just Empty House, it's
Classic.
a cartoon of John Stamos with like 10 joke bubbles in the panel. And I think that, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that was a little bit of our initial like instinct to write like I think we're just like, great, how many joke bubbles can we fit into this thing?
We are both TV comedy writers who do jokes by the yard, and it is it was to sort of slim down those 10 joke bubbles to get one beautiful Tony Cliff picture with one beautiful joke was that was a really cool learning process.
There was some very heated Google Docs back and forth.
Which joke is I said a rude word. As in the Richard Nixon jokes that we made. There are so many Richard, because Mad Magazine
we really
such an influence.
Socked to Tricky Dick in this one.
The lighter side of Beatniks, all of those mad jokes. I'm so sorry.
It's funny because I think we kind of started off with a kind of a different, like, we were worried about joke, right? Because at that point, most of the stuff we say is like, I don't know if it's funny, but we said it in a funny way, and so people seem to laugh at it, right? And there was this worry, like in the first book, where we're like, I don't know if that joke's gonna work. I don't know if this is gonna play. I don't know if this. And Carey just kept saying, like, let me try. Let me see what I can do. Let me show you what I'm thinking. And it was in those like reaction panels, in the facial expressions, in body language, in like the pacing of, the panels and stuff. And it's just like a completely different language of comedy that I think over the last 5-6 years now, we've gotten a chance to like get better. Even if we don't know it, we just trust, I think, more that Carey does. And if Carey's like, it'll work, we're like, says it'll work. We don't have to worry about it. It's
so
great.
Griffin, a lot of the time when I'm getting the script from you and Clint, so one of the things that's really fun for me is seeing the ways in which you took jokes from the podcast and managed to find like a new home for it, where you're like, well, this whole scene got cut, or this doesn't make any sense anymore, but we thought that this thing was funny, so we're going to kind of find a new spot for it. And then sometimes you've written entirely new stuff. I mean, sorry, now I'm calling you out because you've been quiet for a while. I'd love to hear if you have anything to contribute to the discussion of comedy and podcast books.
I genuinely think Crystal Kingdom is, like, from an inside baseball perspective, like a really fascinating project, a really fascinating book, because that was the consideration from this point, like before this point, right? Was we have jokes that are ended up on t-shirts and stuff, a lot of them unauthorized t-shirts, and it's those things. When it was one of us who said it in table talk, you still want to make sure that it's in the book. So how do you get one of the characters to organically say it? Do we get them to reference real world stuff like Merle's Kenny Chesney tattoo? Like, do we actually put that stuff in? But
Spoiler, we did.
Yeah. Crystal Kingdom is where we sort of introduce the campaign arc, like what the D&D campaign that we played like will ultimately be about. And so from that point on, like, then it's less like what joke are the things that people remember about the show and how can we incorporate them? And now it's honestly more, what are the sort of dramatic beats or the narrative beats or like the world building that we do from this point on? And how do we like make sure that all of that stuff gets in? Because a joke you can cut pretty easily, but like I keep using the word dense, which is not a good word. Like, it's a word that makes it sound bad.
Weighty.
A weighty
yeah.
bit of world building.
Grand.
Yeah, a thick moment.
Yeah.
THICC,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
One of them thick moments.
These books are dummy thick.
You can't leave those out, because then all of a sudden, like, the rest of the thing doesn't make sense. So like, there's still plenty of jokes and stuff like that, and that will continue to be a part of it. But Crystal Kingdom is where we kind of throw our hat over the fence, so to speak, narratively speaking. It is where the story becomes like very important to the thing, and from every book from that point on, like, that becomes the focus. So it is a very interesting book for a lot of reasons, I hope, but that one for me personally as one of the writers on it.
I will also say I can't speak to working with Tony because Tony was not our co-adapter, but I can say for Carey, the care with which Carey would like put thought into just like physicality and body language. I remember I was talking, I think it was about the huddles or them like whipping around a corner, right? Where like at first it was awkward and they were bad at it and like bonking heads and running into each other. And then by like book 3, their huddles were like super clean, and it was just this idea.
And Taco stopped leaning on Merle's head, which was
right.
key.
Like they got better at working together and more comfortable physically with each other, not just in like their facial expression, but also just like literally how they stand around each other, who talks to who, like when they're looking at each other, how they react. Just that evolution of them growing closer wasn't just in the dialogue, it's part of the physicality as well. And it's a whole different visual language that I think we're really fortunate to have Carey on board, who thinks in those terms. We don't know.
So to kind of bring back around then for Carey and Tony, I'd love to hear more about the way, from your perspective, either because things from the podcast that got cut, or sort of subtext you thought was interesting, or just sort of richness to the world. Like, Carey, you just did a whole video about this recently. For those of you who pre-ordered the book, you would have already watched this excellent video that Carey Pietsch made with, I think, Travis and Clint. Anyway, can you talk a little bit about some of the kind of, because for those of you who were watching this panel, despite not reading very many comic books, comics are a very visually dense medium. See the word again, in terms of how much information you can get on the page, but like in a very
visually thick medium.
Yeah, visually thick, visually dummy thick medium.
I often say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I just made that up.
Nope.
Thank you. So I'd love to hear from Carey and Tony about some of what you did in terms of kind of layering some of that background, kind of richness and texture and jokes into the books that you were working on. And Carey, I will once again make you go first.
I was gonna ask a question of Tony, but I'll save that for my closer. I think Travis spoke to one of the things I really love about comics, which is that you have this kind of by default back channel of information that you're always presenting to the reader without necessarily needing to directly call attention to it, right? So you don't have to stop and have a character say like, oh wow, like great huddle, you guys. That is just part of the information you're presenting, is the way that someone is physically carrying out an action, or what characters are doing in the background, or like how they're interacting with the world, which I feel like is a big, like a really cool way to sell an environment, is to show a character interacting with it in some way. So not just like, oh, there's a cool table at this TGI Fridays in Bubble or whatever, but also what are the people in the background doing in that room? And like, how do you really flesh it out through this sense of kind of how does the world go on when the main characters aren't in it? So I think that's something I really love about comics is you get to present all of this information in addition to whatever the focus of a panel might be. But I do want to hear about specifically the TGI, or whatever it's Fridays spot in Bubble, because that is such a visually dense scene that like I've had to go back and reread it a bunch to appreciate the action and the acting and all of the really tasty stuff on the walls.
It says a lot about Bubble also that there's a major action set piece in a Fridays on an alien planet.
A knockoff. Yeah.
Praise be to whatever. It's not any similarity between this and any actual restaurant or location is entirely coincidental.
Tony, let's lean into this. Let's get some free mozzarella sticks. We love Fridays.
We don't have them. Do we have them in Canada? We might have them in Canada. I don't know. Yeah, geez. I'm stumbling here because I can only go back to like, what we were talking about before, which is it's like there's just so much in the story that lends itself. I don't know. It just feels like it comes naturally and easily. Like it's all in there. Like, the TGI, TGI or whatever. It's Fridays. Like it's just. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm gonna end up circling this because it's
I
just
think
like
that scene is a really good example of a time when we had quite a dense script for it. Dense again. I'll say girthy. It was a girthy script.
We'll talk about script length, script girth, also very important.
Yeah, sorry, but that was when we had quite a busy script for that bit. And then when it came to layout, there's a few panels in there where you can see when you look, there are some empty bare panels because they were A, lovely to look at, and B, like just a word or like a sound, or there's a sound effect that I will not spoil in that. It's like, that's kind of all you need, and a testament to that translation process between script and comic.
I mean, I think that reading both books, it really feels like Tony and Carey, like you're both playing in the space to a certain extent, right? Like you're finding ways to sort of do fun stuff with the book in the background. It's nice.
I think as a bit of a tangent, I feel like there's this idea here, like everybody says, oh, comics, it's not literature, it's not this is literature. It's lowbrow, that sort of thing.
This is a book.
Yeah.
But I think something you guys were talking about earlier hints to the fact that like we are better at reading the visual information in these than anybody. Like nobody recognizes it, or it's difficult to recognize that fact. It's difficult to interpret that as reading. But we're very, very skilled at looking at a picture. You said picture's worth 1,000 words and that sort of thing.
As coined by Travis earlier this panel.
Yeah. Well, that's
sometimes I try to put like 2,000 words into a picture if I can. But like we're good at deciphering this, and but it also comes so naturally and so easily, and it's that it's difficult, I think, to recognize how complex that reading process is in a comic. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is you guys have to be like cinematographers, and like Ali was saying, because there have been so many panels where Carey has put the perspective kind of looking, up at the person to give them. I think it's the last shot in Here There Be Gerblins, right, where we're seeing Lucretia there, and like the perspective of it makes it impressive, like because of the angle we're looking at it, because of the the picture itself, the entire composition it's a reveal because of the way it's drawn, right? Like we can look at that and be like, oh, okay, this is important because of like purely in the way it's presented.
So kind of speaking more about both, the advantages of comics, and also honestly the advantages of getting to revisit your story, and in some cases kind of revise it, in other cases just do a different adaptation of it. I'd love to hear you all talk a little bit about some of the ways in which you felt like bringing your story over to comics, they kind of changed in a way that you're excited about. Like I know, Sarah, you've talked previously about specifically the character of Van, who's very different in the comics in some ways than he was in the original podcast.
Yeah, that was, love the podcast. It is a sitcom, and it's, characters reset in a sitcom, and they they stay the same, which is the same as saying they're reset. But they so the week to week, you want them to be the same character you always love. And the beautiful thing about graphic novels is you are expected to send your hero on a journey. And the character of Van, there are a million great jokes of Van. He's the so likable, he's unlikable party guy who's always got a million different hobbies and habits and a billion friends, and he knows where all the great parties are and he knows the coolest bars and all this stuff. And obviously, I feel like the funniest thing to do in that situation is work out what's wrong with him and why he's broken. Why are you like this is a good thing for any comedy writer to say to their characters. And so it was great. That was just, we spent a long time as writers just like sort of interrogating him as to why he couldn't just be still and be in the moment. And that's something that pays off hopefully quite emotionally in the comic. Again, that was something we brought to it, that was why a man who's like this is like this. Yeah.
In Griffin, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into spoilers here, but there's a lot of this in Crystal Kingdom. And one of the big ones is the Miller family. Like there's some pretty big changes to both how much sort of screen time they're taking up and specifically like where the emphasis is on, I'm going to let you decide how into the spoilers you want to get here. But in the podcast, we find out about Lucas's mom kind of late in the book. And from here, she's kind of on their page one.
Yeah, it was sort of an honest look that we did. I feel like after even a couple of drafts of the script for Crystal Kingdom, where it is a narratively thick book. And we wanted to make sure that, like, you know, we've talked a lot about the goofs and the comedy, but also we want to have characters that are not just empty shirts and not just like, you know, plot speakers that just like give you the plot and are there to drive the story forward. Because that's been really important to us in you know, all of our books. And I think that there was sort of an honest reckoning with Crystal Kingdom and sort of its shortcomings in that regard. In the podcast. And so we took a look at like the characters that were in the podcast and said, how can we make them in some cases make their plight more relatable, and in some cases like make their ethics less monstrous. There was a lot to sort of pick apart there. And I think that once we sort of realized that, one, we realized like, this is going to take a lot of work and some like wholesale rewriting of certain bits and wholesale addition of entire scenes. But I think that work is really when we all kind of realize like, okay, this is the book, like this is what it needs to be. So yeah, I'm not going to spoil like any more specific details beyond that, but yeah, the Miller family, who are sort of like the main new characters in Crystal Kingdom, get like way fleshed out in a way that they just don't in the podcast. So that was very exciting for us.
It's extremely good stuff.
In general, I think one of the big differences, and this is I think a very specific like thing to Adventure Zone, but because of the nature of the way we basically wrote it and recorded it, right, you have like 3 player characters and then Griffin playing everyone else, right? So like there weren't a lot of scenes that didn't contain at least one of the 3 main characters. But with the graphic novel, that's not a consideration, right? We can linger on Lucretia's facial expression as the 3 leave the room. We can have that scene between Lucas and his mother. We can have, you know, more moments with characters that aren't just Merle, Taco, and Magnus, which was not something we were really able to naturally do without it becoming like, well, Griffin's talking to himself 4 different times, right? Like, and so it really has added, I think, more depth to the story as well, just moving the point of view of events outside of just the 3 main characters.
So this one, I would sincerely love if everybody can, we have just enough time for everybody to answer this one. I would just love to hear about something from your book, whether something that got changed or just a thing you really think was cool that you're really looking forward to your readers getting to see. Like, it's easy for us to forget because we've been working on these for so long, but this is like a brand new book. People have no idea what they're in for. So I'd love to hear kind of like at least one thing you're like really jazzed for your fans to see. And I will make Jordan go first.
Yeah, sure. This is little, but I was when I was flipping through the book recently. I loved this. So one of our main characters, Mitch, who is a very basic man who is unfortunately living inside the hipster bubble. His big dream is to own a party bus. His dream is to own the world's greatest party bus, and it's something he kind of mentions in the podcast, but because comics, we get to see inside his head when he's dreaming of the world's greatest party bus. And I don't know, it's just a fun moment. It's such a funny visual. I'll spoil a joke. I think this was Sarah. There's a sign in the bus that says, "I like big bus and I cannot lie."
No, well, I got to send out an email
That's gonna
that
move
said,
books. People.
I got to send out an email that's like, we've got a party bus here. I need a funny name for this party bus. And then like options.
Yeah, this is our bread and butter. So we will come up with 20 funny bus names, but I like big bus and I cannot lie. I took the rest of the day off. I wasn't even at work.
Yeah.
I was just
So Sarah,
was a
what's something you're
spoiler.
looking forward to people from seeing from the book?
You know what I found really, it's an overall kind of mood of the entire graphic novel. And I've just been doing so much gig economy in our lives at the moment with all Deliveroos and Ubers and all this stuff. And I think there's just something wonderful about a story about human beings struggling to maintain their humanity in the gig economy. And I was articulating that through massive swear word monsters and bugs and imps and all of Tony Cliff's astonishing sound effects, including my favorite one. There's a bug being zapped at the beginning, and I think it's, and I'm going to try and get it right. It's bland. There are so many great bug zapping sound effects, but I think it's bland when a bug is being zapped. And if you're struggling in your gig economy job, you may find a huge amount of catharsis in this graphic novel. Yeah.
I was flipping through it just a minute ago, and there's a point where Mitch sends his laser blast thing.
Yeah.
That's not what it's called. Out the car window, the sound effect is binch. I'm like, all right, well, pat myself on the back for that. I am greatly looking forward to everybody enjoying Mitch's drug trip.
Yeah.
Because very early on, I'm like, oh, it would be wild if the reader had to follow the passage of the sequence. The reader had to rotate the book to be able to keep reading the thing. And I pitched this really early on, expecting anybody in the process to say, that's not a great idea. And nobody did.
As
So
Tony has since
here we
learned,
are.
I am a terrible influence and will not stop you from doing dumb nonsense.
Just surrounded by enablers.
Travis.
I think that the Legion battle is really cool. I think people will like that. I think that that's really awesome. I also think that there are some Merle moments that are really, really good in this one. There's some good Merle moments.
This was, I mean, in the podcast, this was kind of Merle's arc, is how I thought about it. So it's great to see that in the graphic novel. This arc of the podcast ends with a sort of cryptic poem almost that hints at the identities of some folks that is later revealed in the sort of ending of the whole series, and seeing how Carey sort of laid that out is, I don't know, my favorite thing about the book. And it's the thing I think folks who are familiar with the podcast and know who those cryptic hints refer to are gonna really enjoy that.
Ooh, I think I really love the scene that Griffin was talking about adding in earlier, where we get a bigger peek at the Lucas and Maureen Miller together, and also all of the scenes with Kravitz are just they were a treat to draw. They're a treat to go back and reread.
It feels
It's
like
a really
cheating
good
to say
book.
Kravitz, because I wanted to say that too, and I was like,
yeah.
you can't
Oh,
just
thank
say
you for
Kravitz.
saving it for me.
You're
I did.
welcome. I want it because, like, that's the thing. We already like showed the art, and everyone just absolutely went bonkers for it. But Kravitz, and I think this is the official intro of Carey Fang Battle, right? Like,
Yeah.
who was like my favorite NPC, and the reason that I made my character become best friends with her.
It doesn't count as a self-insert, just to sort of Carey. There might be people not familiar with the podcast who think Carey did a self-insert in the graphic novel. I inserted Carey in the podcast, and so this is a self-insert by proxy, which is not.
It made some of the notes for this book very confusing.
Yeah.
I think I did default just calling her Fang Battle most of the time for the sake of clarity.
Right. The human Carey.
And we introduced Noelle. Like, we introduced some absolutely amazing NPCs in this one. This is a good book, man. People are really going to like it.
For everybody joining us from home, thank you so much. I know this has been a weird couple of years, but we have spent most of them making comics. Miraculously, we finished our books. They're coming out. Congratulations, everybody. Actually, honestly, you did it. So thank you so much. For those of you at home who have not already purchased these books and read all of them, you can get The Adventure Zone at theadventurezonecomic.com, and you can get Bubble at bit.ly/bubblebook, which is a URL that we made right before this panel to make absolutely sure you could immediately go purchase this book as soon as possible. And enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of Comic-Con at home. We really appreciate you coming and joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.